Hello. This is part 2 of our study on Habakkuk. And again, I will probably pronounce it incorrectly at some point. To just review real quickly where this is taking place. This is all, part 1 is mostly introduction, a lot of background information about Habakkuk. So this is all in there to a much stronger degree. It takes place, he lives in the kingdom of Judah. Israel is gone. It has been taken captive by the Assyrians. And so Habakkuk is living in Judah and is a prophet in Judah. And this book is written for those who live in Judah. Time-wise, we have Habakkuk right here. He lives through some of the time of the Josiah, but also right now, at the time this is happening and being written later, it's during the kingdom of Joachim, and other prophets around there. Again, you can see this part 1. If you're interested in a little bit more information about that time period and what's going on, read Jeremiah. Okay, so that is just a little bit of context. The key verse that most commentaries or people who have written about the book of Habakkuk has been given as verse 3 of chapter 1. And I want to read that for us one more time. This is part of what we studied in part 1. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are all before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. So I want to ask the question, a question that many of us might have asked God ourselves, is why? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why does your spirit point out my faults first? Why is it that God allows us to see our own sins, our past sins and our present sins? Because no one is perfect and we do continue to sin. And I think part of the reason why he does that is to keep us humble, to remind us of how we really need him to help us, to remind us that we need to be submissive to his will, to be willing to do what he asks us and tells us is the best thing for us, to help us value the salvation that we have been given, to recognize that we could not do it on our own because we are obviously not doing it on our own daily. Another idea, the question would be, why does God allow us to see the sin around us? Why is there sin around us? Why does he allow us? Why is it so prevalent? Why is it that we notice it to the degree we do, the way it really is? And I think part of that is to show us what could have been us. Without him, that could have been me. That person and what they're doing could be me. It could also be to help us recognize how much we despise sin. Not the sinner, but the sin, that we despise it. We don't want to see it. We don't want it to be in the world. And again, is recognize that we can only keep ourselves out of it with God's help, and with God's and people who are doing it, committing it, how much they need God, to be reminded that God has called us to make disciples of all nations, that we are surrounded by sin because they don't have Christ. And our job, the job that Jesus gave us before he ascended into heaven after his resurrection, was make disciples, tell people about God, and help them grow. Now, salvation only comes through Jesus and God's Spirit touching people's heart. But How can they do that? Like Scripture tells us, how can they do that if they don't hear about it, if they don't know about it? We need to live a life that attracts them to Christ, and then we need to speak the truth, the good news that is found in Jesus. And I think part of the reason why the more we become aware of the sin that surrounds us, the more we notice the sin in us. In us is the realization that we need more of God. But around us reminds us that we can't just sit on our own laurels, that we are called. The reason there's sin in the world is because they need Christ. They need you, they need me, they need Christ. Good song. And it could be used for a Community Care Ministries theme. Yeah, I'm sidestepping there. Okay, so now I want us to look at the second portion of chapter 1, and that is what we're going to focus on today. And today will probably end up being a little shorter because it's only just these 7 verses, verse 5 through 11, chapter 1. And so I want to start off by reading it through, and then we're going to just kind of like talk a little bit about it. So I invite you open to Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5. Again, Habakkuk is a minor prophet. It's in the back end of the Old Testament before you get to the New Testament. It's hard to find because it really is just 2 sheets. I mean, that's 2 pages out of the entire Bible is Habakkuk. If you have not read at least chapter 1, pause this and read chapter 1 first. Just pause and read it. It won't take long. It's just one chapter. And so that you kind of get yourself into this place. So here is what it says. Look at all the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. I am raising up the Babylonians or Chaldeans, depends on your version. Chaldea is the area where Babylon is. It's also the same area that Abraham came out of when God called him to the promised land. Okay? It's almost kind of like a full circle. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwelling places not their own. They are feared and dreaded people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like a vulture, swooping to devour. They all come bent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind and gather prisoners like sand. They deride kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and capture them. Then they sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose own strength is their God. Okay, so Habakkuk, in many ways, reminds me of the book of Job, but much shorter, much simpler, and less personal, more national. Job complains, God answers. It's a conversation. When other people get met, they stick their nose in and all that. But Habakkuk is just a conversation between Habakkuk and God. That's all it is. Habakkuk complains. Look at the sin that I'm living in. Look at the nation. This is your nation. This nation should be loving you and worshiping you. And look at how they treat each other. And look at the evil that's going on. And what are you going to do about it? These are your people. What are you going to do about it? And God's response is takes him aback a little. Habakkuk aback a little. So here he is. If you haven't noticed, when I do Bible studies, I tend to be fluid. I don't take myself too seriously because I take God's word seriously, and I refuse to be too dry. I love it, and so I want to share it, and so I just kind of like say it. And if God puts some thought in my mind, I just say it. So anyway, here he is complaining, and God's answer is like, you're going to what? Huh? God's like, look outside your nation. And stop dwelling on all of this little stuff here for a minute. Look what's going on in the world around you. See those Babylonians? Even if I tried to explain it to you, you would not understand what I'm planning to do. God, in his wisdom, is actually going to use the Babylonians to fix Israel, the nation, his people, descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's going to actually use these pagans to help his people straighten up. And so then he describes what this Babylonian, I mean, it's like anyone who knows anything knows what they're like. I mean, it's like you ask somebody to describe the certain country, or, good or bad, in the world, and if you know anything about what's going on in the world, you have a description to give. Well, here's God's description of what is going to happen, how he is going to fix the people who are cheating each other in the kingdom of Judah, and how he's going to fix the people who are lying to each other, and how he's going to fix the people who are causing violence or stealing or whatever in Judah. He's going to send the Babylonians. He's like, isn't this a little overkill, literally, to send the Babylonians? I mean, these are people who are ruthless and impetuous and feared and dreaded. Their horses are swifter than leopards and fiercer than wolves. They come and they're like a vulture swooping down to devour. Their hordes advance like the desert wind. They gather prisoners like sand, like scooping up a handful of sand, just prisoners, here you are. And they deride kings, scoff at rulers, laugh at fortified cities that walled cities. They sweep past like the wind and go on. With the fortified cities, I pulled up some picture. I went looking because like, how do we visualize what God is describing here? He says that they laugh at all fortified cities. They build earthen ramps and capture them. And here's a picture, a painting of Babylon taking Judah. This is Jerusalem, the walled city of Jerusalem, earthen ramp made up, and the Babylonians taking the Jews captive to Babylon. I saw this picture and I went, that's the one. That's the one that you can, this description in Habakkuk tells you of. There's that earthen ramp. It's like they laugh at, you think that wall is going to keep us out. It's not going to keep us out. We're so powerful and such a big army. We're just going to build a ramp and do that. And years later, almost 700 years later, the Romans did the similar thing in Masada. That was how they got into Masada. This huge mountain, and the Romans it took them a long time, months and months, if not over a year, to build an earthen ramp so that they could get up there and capture Masada. It's what the Babylonians did, and it was known. And what they did with the captives was they took them from Jerusalem up and around to Babylon. Now they did it this way because this is where the rivers are. You got to stay with water. You don't want to go across the desert here. You wouldn't survive. This is Iraq nowadays. This is Iraq right there. That is modern day Iraq, and they follow the rivers around back to the area where Abraham originated from. So they're actually, it's almost like a start over. Well, let's do this over again. So here he is describing this and telling them this is what he's like. Okay, Have you heard the saying, too good to be true? Well, when Habakkuk hears this, it's like, it's too bad to be true. It's like, I can't believe this. It's so horrific. This is overkill. And that reaction we're going to see in the next study. But it's like, I can't deal with it. It doesn't make sense. But when I read it, it reminds me of another situation, another time when God is willing to do. My dog has seen something outside the window in the back bedroom because it's like, squirrel, whatever. Anyway, if you can hear her. So what God is willing to do to save the nation of Israel from itself. And he is willing to let them be taken captive by the Babylonians. And we know from Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel that they are there for 70 years. They're taken captive and they're there for 70 years before they're returned back as a completely different nation. You see, the history of the nation of Israel, from the very beginning, they cross over the Jordan River into the promised land. Joshua and the priests and the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and they come in, and God has made this covenant with them. This is their land, and all they have to do is be true to him, and they're not. They break the covenant over and over and over and over and over again throughout the Judges, the time of the Judges. And they break the covenant, and they get into a desperate situation. They plead God for help, and he sends a new judge who comes and saves them, and everything gets back to normal, back to good, and then they forget him again, and it's back and forth and back and forth, and help save us, and now we ignore you, and help save us, we love you, thank you, and now we ignore you, back and forth and back and forth. And then come the kings, and through David and Saul, David and Solomon, it was okay, Solomon started messing up with all those wives and their gods, but by the time his son came and they had the split in the country, in the kingdom, from that point on, it depended on the king. And you had a good king, they followed God. Bad king, left God. Good king, followed God. Bad king, left God. Bad king, left God. Good king, followed God. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And nothing was changing this. They just kept on doing it. They kept on breaking the covenant that they had with God. They had made the covenant with God. It's kind of like both signed on to this covenant. God was faithful to it, and he was faithful to it. At this point, he was willing to allow the Babylonians to come and take this dreaded Babylonians, come and take his people captive for 70 years, just to change the nation's heart. Because when they came back out of Babylon, we know that from that point on, as a nation, individuals, this covenant is with the nation, not with individuals, it's with the nation. As a nation, the nation never has left God since. They have always considered Jehovah their God, the God of Israel. And to this day, they still do it. But it took this. And, we look at that, and when God says, for I'm going to do something in your days that you will not believe, even if you were told. It's like he can't even explain to them then how this is going to work. But he knows it will work. And he needs it to work so that Jesus can come for 600 years later and be our Savior, mankind's Savior. And he needs the nation of Israel to still be true to God so that Jesus can come. And so he's here. God's got this long view that we are not aware of, that we cannot be, we can't conceive it. Yet, when I read this, it reminds me of, this is a desperate move of God to save his nation and to save mankind, because Jesus has to come through this nation. And so it's like he's willing to do the most desperate thing, which is allow Babylon to come and take captive his nation for 70 years. And that makes me think that when you read the last book of the Bible, Revelation, and the drastic measures that happen during the final days, the last 7 years of this known Earth's time, the drastic things that happen, a half of the earth, a third of the earth, a quarter of the earth, it's like all of this destruction, this horrific stuff that happens. I now look at that and I go, this is God's final attempt to bring people to him. It's not him punishing, it's him drawing, saying, if this is the only thing that will save you for eternity, I am willing to allow it to happen just so that you will come and be saved, so that for eternity I will have you, even though you have had to live through this. That's how I see it. I'm not going to say that I'm a great prophet or anything, but when I read this, I who have read and have studied and have taught Revelation, the book of Revelation, I see God's desperation to reach the most people possible all at once. I don't think I mentioned it here on part one, but I do know that I mentioned it on Facebook. So I say, right now, today, this moment, the day that you're watching this video, there are as many people alive on earth as have ever lived on earth, from the beginning of time, from the first man to yesterday. You add up all the people that lived in all of that time, and there are more people alive on earth right now than then, than all of that. And when we get to the last ditch effort of God, I can see him allowing the earth, the tiredness and the evil that surrounds us to cause and this stuff to happen to draw the most people to him. That is how his love for our eternal soul is strong enough, not just to allow what he describes here to happen to the nation of Israel, but what happened to Jesus on the cross. He allowed that because his love for us is so strong and so deep. His love for us is so strong and so deep, he allowed the nation to be taken captive by the Babylonians. He will allow those seals and trumpets and bowls to happen in our future, in the end times, to try and bring the most people. Anyone who will be willing will be drawn to him. And maybe all of these videos are his way, all these live streams of church services and preaching and Bible studies and in different languages and everything, might be his way of trying to get the word out before all this happens, so that people are aware that he is the answer to our prayers. He is the answer, and that only he can help the world become a better place through the people. That the world needs Christ. The world, those who do evil, they when we see that, we see our need to share God's love and to let them know that there is a different way of life, that you don't have to live this way anymore, that you can be changed through God's powerful Spirit made available through Jesus' sacrifice. And so that is where we're stopping now. We're going on good time here too. My homework for you this time is read Habakkuk again, all 3 chapters. It's 3 chapters, people. Just read it all the way through one more time, and then read chapter 1 again. So that means you'll be reading 4 chapters in the next 3-4 days. So I want you, that is your main homework. The other one is take a colored pencil or pen, crayon, I don't care what you have, and underline in this section that we looked at today, we read today, verses 5 through 11, underline all the words that describe the Babylonians and what is coming to Israel. The warning that God is giving Habakkuk. He's here like, this is you can see what they're like. You know, it's like, word has gotten to you. I know you know what they're like. And even though I tried to explain my overall plan, you still wouldn't understand it. So you need to trust me on this one. And that's where we're going to stop today. And I hope to see you next time for part 3, where we will finish chapter 1, which will be Habakkuk's response to God. It's an interesting one. So I invite you to read all of Habakkuk and the first chapter again, and underline the descriptive words of what is coming by way of the Babylonians. What is the description of the Babylonians? And with that, I will say adieu, goodbye, adios, and I'll see you soon. Ciao.